The courtroom had seen arrogance before, but nothing prepared anyone for the day Evan Reynolds, the son of Providence Police Chief Daniel Reynolds, walked in with the swagger of someone who believed the law belonged to him. Hours earlier, a 74-year-old Vietnam veteran named Arthur Hale lay on the cold pavement of Brookline Park, bleeding and gasping for breath, after Evan assaulted him during a late-night outburst that witnesses described as both violent and completely unprovoked. Arthur survived, barely. His ribs were fractured, his wrist shattered, and deep bruising covered the left side of his face. But what shocked the community wasn't just the brutality of the attack, it was the attitude Evan carried afterward. According to bystanders, Evan smirked as officers arrived, casually saying, "My dad will clean this up. He always does." That single sentence spread across Providence like wildfire, igniting outrage on social media, filling local news cycles, and drawing veterans from across the state demanding accountability. And when Evan finally stepped into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, he didn't look scared, he looked annoyed, as if this entire hearing was beneath him. But there was something he didn't know. Something everyone in the courtroom sensed but couldn't identify. A truth sitting quietly in the back row, waiting for the right moment to rise. And when Judge Caprio discovered the full story behind this assault, what he did next stunned the entire courtroom, shattered Evan's arrogance, and forced even Chief Reynolds to confront a decision no parent should ever face. Before we continue, if you believe justice must apply to everyone equally, take a moment to subscribe to Real Judge Stories and comment your thoughts. Your support helps us bring these powerful real-life courtroom stories to the world. On the evening of September 14th, the quiet paths of Brookline Park were lit only by the dim glow of street lamps and the soft rustle of early autumn leaves. At 9:47 p.m., a park ranger received multiple calls reporting a young man screaming, and an elderly man injured on the ground. That elderly man was Arthur Hale, a decorated Vietnam veteran known in his neighborhood for walking the park every night to keep his legs strong after an old combat injury. Witnesses later described the moment everything spiraled. Arthur had simply asked the driver of a loud, speeding car to slow down. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just raised a hand and said, "Easy there, son. People walk here." But that small, polite warning collided with the explosive ego of Evan Reynolds, who was behind the wheel of a custom blue Dodge Challenger. According to a woman pushing a stroller nearby, Evan slammed on the brakes, stormed out of the car, and charged toward Arthur with the fury of someone who thought accountability was optional. Arthur tried to step back. His hands were raised. But Evan didn't stop. He shoved Arthur hard, sending him crashing onto the pavement. Then, fueled by whatever anger had been brewing inside him that night, Evan punched him, once, twice, before a group of bystanders rushed in, shouting for him to stop. One man restrained Evan, another shielded Arthur's body until police arrived. Arthur lay motionless, his breathing shallow. His glasses shattered beside him, blood pooling beneath his cheek. Yet even in that painful moment, he whispered, "I just wanted him to slow down, someone could get hurt." What stunned officers wasn't just the brutality of the attack, but Evan's reaction as he folded his arms and scoffed, "You're all acting like this is a big deal. My dad will handle it." That sentence spread through the crowd like gasoline meeting fire. People recorded. People cursed. Someone yelled, "No one is above the law." By the time the ambulance carried Arthur away, Providence wasn't just worried, they were furious. And Judge Caprio would soon feel the weight of that fury inside his courtroom. News of the attack didn't stay local for long. By sunrise, Providence had already turned the incident into a citywide storm that no one, especially the Reynolds family, could ignore. Clips recorded by bystanders were circulating everywhere, showing a wounded Arthur Hale being lifted onto a stretcher while Evan stood off to the side, bored, scrolling through his phone. That image struck a nerve. It wasn't just disrespectful, it symbolized something people had feared for years, power being used as a shield instead of a responsibility. Veterans groups mobilized immediately. Dozens gathered outside the hospital holding signs that read, "Respect our heroes," and "Accountability for all." Local radio callers demanded justice, sharing their own stories of privilege gone unchecked. Social media exploded with comments from across the state, many calling for Chief Reynolds to make a public statement. It didn't help that reporters quickly found out who Evan was. The son of a respected police chief assaulting a Vietnam veteran became headline material. Journalists camped outside the Reynolds home. Cameras followed every police update. Even national outlets picked up the story, framing it as a test of leadership for Chief Reynolds and a test of integrity for the justice system. Inside City Hall, officials felt the pressure. Some quietly worried that mishandling the case would spark protests. Others insisted the matter was simple, an innocent man had been hurt, and the attacker needed to face consequences, no exceptions. By the time Evan arrived for his first court hearing, the tension wasn't just about the assault anymore. The entire city was watching, waiting to see if justice would bend, or finally stand firm. The morning of the hearing, Providence Municipal Court felt less like a courtroom and more like a pressure chamber. Every seat was filled long before the session began, and a quiet hum of tension settled across the room. Veterans in navy jackets with embroidered patches sat shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the front. Reporters positioned themselves along the walls, notebooks open, cameras ready. Even residents who had never stepped into a courthouse before came to witness something they feared might end in favoritism, or hoped would end in justice. When Evan Reynolds entered, the atmosphere shifted. He walked with a stiff-backed arrogance, chin tilted high, hands in his designer jacket pockets like he was arriving for a school meeting instead of facing charges for a violent assault. His attorney followed close behind, whispering instructions Evan didn't seem interested in hearing. A few people in the audience exchanged disgusted looks, as if his attitude alone confirmed their worst expectations. Across the room, Arthur Hale sat quietly, his left wrist still wrapped in a supportive brace, deep purple bruises fading unevenly across his cheek. Despite the pain, he kept his posture steady. To many, he looked more dignified than the young man who had injured him. Then, almost unnoticed at first, a figure slipped into the last row, Chief Daniel Reynolds. No uniform. No badge. Just a father in a worn brown coat, face tense, sitting behind everyone as if trying to disappear. Only a few reporters recognized him, and they exchanged wide-eyed glances. When Judge Frank Caprio finally entered, the entire room stood, not just out of respect, but out of anticipation. Today wasn't just another case. It was a test of whether justice would bow to power, or rise above it. Before Judge Caprio could even begin, Evan Reynolds leaned toward his attorney with a smirk, whispering loud enough for the first two rows to hear, "Let's get this over with. I've got places to be." The arrogance in his tone rippled through the courtroom like a cold wind. Even his lawyer shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight of the audience's reaction. When Judge Caprio called the case, Evan stepped forward, hands still in his pockets, shoulders loose, eyes drifting around the room as if he were bored. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at Arthur Hale. He didn't look at the crowd filled with veterans who had come to support the man he assaulted. Instead, he exhaled dramatically, as if the entire proceeding was an inconvenience. "Mr. Reynolds," Judge Caprio began, "you're charged with assault resulting in serious bodily injury. Do you understand the gravity of this situation?" Evan shrugged. "Honestly, Your Honor, this whole thing is blown way out of proportion. The guy came at me first. I barely touched him." A ripple of murmurs erupted behind him. Veterans shook their heads. A few gasped. Arthur Hale closed his eyes, as if trying to steady his heartbeat. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, studying the young man's expression. "You barely touched a 74-year-old man." "He shouldn't have yelled at me," Evan snapped. "People shouldn't provoke others in the middle of the night. I was just defending myself." His attorney tugged at his sleeve, whispering frantically. Evan pulled his arm away. "Relax," he muttered. "Dad's here. Everything will be fine." The moment those words left his mouth, the entire mood of the courtroom shifted. A few heads turned toward the back row where Chief Reynolds sat stone still, his jaw tight, eyes fixed forward, not on Evan, but on Judge Caprio. Judge Caprio narrowed his gaze. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't change his expression. But everyone watching could feel it, the judge had just crossed a line internally. Evan's entitlement, his lies, and his casual dismissal of accountability had struck a nerve. And the judge wasn't done. Not even close. Judge Caprio turned his attention toward the quiet man sitting in the second row. "Mr. Hale," he said gently, "if you're able, would you please step forward?" The room shifted as Arthur Hale rose slowly, bracing himself on the armrest before walking to the podium. Each step was deliberate. His wrist brace peeked from beneath his sleeve, and the fading bruises along his cheekbone told the story before he even opened his mouth. Veterans in the gallery straightened, as if standing behind him without moving. Arthur cleared his throat. "Your Honor. I'm not here to ruin anyone's life," he began, voice steady but thin. "I've lived long enough to know people make mistakes. I've made my share." He paused, glancing briefly at Evan, not with anger, but with something heavier. Disappointment. "All I did, was ask him to slow down," Arthur continued. "The park's quiet at night, and families walk there. I didn't want anyone hurt." His voice trembled on the word families. "He didn't even look at me. Just rushed at me like I was nothing." A hush fell over the room. Even the reporters lowered their cameras a little. Arthur took a breath. "I served this country when I was barely old enough to shave. I carried brothers through mud, through fire, through everything war throws at you. I've been knocked down before, but nothing prepares you for the moment a young man half your age hits you like you don't matter." He rested both hands on the podium. "I don't want revenge, Judge. I just want respect. For me, for the uniform I wore, and for the people who never made it home." His words hung in the air like a held breath. For the first time since the hearing began, Evan's expression shifted, just slightly, and the courtroom felt the change. Judge Caprio nodded slowly as Arthur stepped back, then turned toward the clerk. "Please play the security footage submitted into evidence." The lights dimmed slightly as the monitor flickered on. Every eye in the courtroom locked onto the screen. Even Evan, who had spent most of the hearing smirking, finally looked up with a hint of tension in his jaw. The video began with a wide shot of Brookline Park's pathway, quiet, empty, and washed in the dull glow of street lamps. Arthur appeared first, walking slowly with both hands in his jacket pockets. Moments later, a blue Dodge Challenger sped across the frame, tires screeching, engine roaring. The sudden noise made several people in the courtroom stiffen. The car stopped sharply. Evan burst out, shoulders squared, marching toward Arthur with reckless aggression. There was no yelling from Arthur. No threat. Just a simple raised hand, then a step back. What happened next made the entire room tense. Evan shoved Arthur hard enough that the old man's body twisted unnaturally before hitting the ground. Then came the strike, a punch thrown without hesitation, without fear, without humanity. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A veteran in the front row muttered, "Coward." Evan's attorney rubbed his forehead, defeated. Evan exhaled sharply, but the confidence had drained from his eyes. When the video ended, Judge Caprio didn't speak for several seconds. The silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. Finally, the judge looked directly at Evan. His voice was calm, but his words struck harder than the footage. "Mr. Reynolds, that was not a mistake. That was a choice. And everyone knew the case had just turned." Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, letting the silence linger. The weight of the footage still hung in the air when his eyes drifted toward the last row, toward someone who had been painfully still since the moment the hearing began. "Chief Reynolds," Judge Caprio said quietly. The room snapped to attention. Evan's head jerked around, shock slicing through his arrogance. Until now, he had assumed his father was watching from the comfort of his office, not sitting anonymously among the crowd, witnessing every second of the evidence. Chief Daniel Reynolds rose slowly, removing his cap, revealing eyes that looked tired in a way no badge or rank could hide. He walked down the aisle with the heavy steps of a man carrying more than just authority, he was carrying disappointment. Reporters raised their cameras. Veterans whispered. Evan swallowed hard. When the chief reached the front, he stood beside his son, but not close enough to suggest support. Judge Caprio observed the distance, saying nothing at first. Chief Reynolds, Caprio began, were you aware of your son's involvement in this incident before today? The chief nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And were you aware of the severity of Mr. Hale's injuries? Another nod. A longer one. Then the judge asked the question that froze the entire courtroom. Did you know your son has been telling people that you would handle this for him? A muscle twitched in the chief's jaw. He didn't look at Evan. I heard the recordings, he admitted. Every word. Evan's face drained of color. The chief finally turned to his son, not with anger, but with a deep, breaking sorrow. Evan, you have no idea what you've done. And the courtroom braced itself for what would come next. For a long moment, Judge Caprio said nothing. His silence was sharper than any raised voice. The courtroom felt suspended, balanced between authority, disappointment, and the truth pressing down on everyone present. Finally, he folded his hands, leaned forward, and looked directly at Evan. Mr. Reynolds, he began, calm but unyielding, everything I've heard today paints a troubling picture. Not just of what you did, but of what you believe. He let the words sink in. You attacked a 74-year-old veteran who served this nation with courage you cannot begin to understand. Then you assumed your father's rank would erase your actions. That belief, that entitlement, is more dangerous than the force you used that night. Evan lowered his gaze, but it was too late. The truth had been spoken aloud. Judge Caprio turned to Chief Reynolds. Chief, I appreciate you being here. I know this is not easy. The chief nodded, expression drawn tight, eyes fixed on the floor. Your Honor, Chief Reynolds said, voice steady but heavy, I came here today not as the chief of police, but as a father who has failed. A ripple of emotion spread across the room. I taught Evan how to shoot, how to drive, how to respect the uniform, he continued. But somewhere along the way, I didn't teach him how to respect people. I didn't show him that power isn't protection, it's responsibility. He swallowed, fighting the tremor in his voice. When I watched that footage, I didn't see a criminal. I saw my son. But I also saw a man who needed to face the consequences I should have taught him about years ago. He turned toward Evan, eyes wet, jaw tight. I won't speak on your behalf today, he said firmly. And I won't shield you. Justice must be the same for everyone, even my own child. A veteran in the front row whispered, that's a real father. Judge Caprio exhaled softly. Chief Reynolds, your words carry tremendous weight. He turned his attention back to Evan. Young man, accountability isn't punishment. It's a path. One your father is finally allowing you to walk. Evan's shoulders sagged. For the first time, he looked small, stripped of attitude, left with nothing but the truth he could no longer run from. And Judge Caprio was about to decide where that path would lead. Judge Caprio took a deep breath, adjusting his glasses as he looked between Evan, Arthur Hale, and Chief Reynolds. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on the room. Everyone leaned forward, waiting, not just for a punishment, but for a decision that would define what justice truly meant today. Mr. Reynolds, Caprio began, voice steady, your actions were violent, reckless, and fueled by a sense of entitlement that has no place in a civilized society. You harmed a man who has spent his life serving this country. But more than that, you revealed a character shaped by privilege and untouched by accountability. Evan swallowed hard. I am not here to destroy your future, the judge continued. I am here to redirect it. He paused, letting the words settle. For the assault resulting in serious bodily injury, I am sentencing you to 90 days in the Providence County Rehabilitation Facility. You will serve them consecutively, no early release. A murmur spread across the courtroom, but Caprio raised a hand. However, that is not where your learning ends. He leaned forward. Upon release, you will complete 250 hours of community service specifically at the Rhode Island Veterans Support Center. You will listen to their stories. You will work alongside them. You will understand the sacrifices they made. Evan blinked, stunned. You will also attend anger management counseling for 6 months, Caprio continued, and you will participate in a restorative justice program, meeting directly with Mr. Hale when he is ready. Arthur Hale lifted his eyes, surprised but calm. Finally, Caprio said, voice firm, you will create a public accountability letter, not an apology scripted by an attorney, but a genuine reflection of what you have done and what you intend to change. It will be submitted to this court and made public. He settled back in his chair. This sentence is not meant to punish your past, but to force you to grow into someone worthy of a different future. And the courtroom knew, justice had just spoken. Here is your next section, epilogue, 6 months later, written with the same emotional warmth, redemption pacing, and cinematic storytelling rhythm your competitor uses, completely original with your character names. 6 months passed, and the city of Providence carried on, but the people closest to this case hadn't forgotten. Life had changed in ways no one could have predicted, especially for Evan Reynolds, whose world looked nothing like the one he walked into Judge Caprio's courtroom with. He completed his 90 days in the rehabilitation facility, days that were quiet, sobering, and stripped of the privilege he once took for granted. But the true transformation came after his release, when he reported for his first shift at the Rhode Island Veterans Support Center. At the start, some volunteers refused to speak to him. Others kept their distance. And Evan understood why. But he didn't run from it. He showed up early, stayed late, cleaned wheelchairs, sorted supplies, and sat beside veterans during therapy sessions, simply listening, really listening, for the first time in his life. Slowly, walls began to fall. One veteran handed him a folded paper listing unit names from Vietnam. Another shared a photo taken decades earlier in a muddy field. Evan kept every memory sacred. And then came the day Arthur Hale walked through the door. Evan froze, unsure whether to speak. But Arthur approached first. You've been doing good work, he said quietly. I'm trying, Evan replied, voice thick. I'm sorry. Truly. Arthur placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Growth comes from facing yourself, son. Keep going. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something Evan had never expected, a second chance. At home, Chief Reynolds noticed the change too. Their conversations, once strained and short, grew longer, filled with honesty instead of excuses. They were rebuilding, brick by brick. And as word of Evan's transformation spread, Providence saw something rare. A justice that didn't just punish. It healed. In the end, this case became more than a headline, more than a courtroom moment, more than a punishment handed down by Judge Caprio. It became a reminder that justice isn't only about what happens to people, it's about what happens within them. Evan Reynolds learned that strength isn't measured by power, or family names, or the loudness of your voice, but by the courage to face the consequences of your own choices. And Arthur Hale, the man who absorbed the worst of Evan's anger, showed the city that dignity and resilience can speak louder than violence ever will. Providence didn't just witness justice, they witnessed transformation, accountability, and the quiet rebuilding of a broken character. If stories like these matter to you, subscribe to Real Judge Stories and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice helps keep justice alive.